Okay, hello everybody. My name is Hank Levin, and what I came here today to show you is the InnerTrac, and this is the InnerTrac, and this is a kind of a GPS for the mind. Categorically, we call these biomonitors. It's a kind of a mind analysis piece of equipment. There are a number of them on the market. They do different things. We call this the GPS for the mind. And it allows us to find specific thoughts. It's unique in that respect. There are a number of other things there called, one is called the heart math. It's used in counseling as an aid to counseling. Yesterday, Rhonda talked to me about the, let's see, the what do you call it? The eBox R?
The eBox, yeah. Zyto eBox.
The Zyto eBox. This is unique, I think, and then it allows you to find a specific thought, and we'll see how that applies and how we can use that. I want to give you a brief history of the InnerTrac. I've developed a number of different biomonitors, and the last one before the InnerTrac actually works on a PC, and it creates a graph. So you see a graph of the differences in resistance. It's actually what it does is it tracks differences in resistance. It's a kind of a galvanic skin response meter, and it shows a needle moving back and forth, and you interpret these different movements, these changes, in various ways that are helpful. But looking at the graph, we realized that certain key indicators show up as patterns, and we learned to apprehend these patterns, have the programmer apprehend them, and one of them occurs, it lights up a little LED. We'll see this later. I'll show this to you. It's a little hard to see right now. I don't think you can see those lights going on. I have to turn the lights down here, but we have a light we have a series of lights that show discharge of negative energy. We have a light that shows an increase of energy. We even have a light that shows a release, a transcendence of the issue that you're dealing with. And we have a light that shows when the person is upset, which is very useful, because if the person's upset, any kind of session, any kind of protocol, that's the first thing you have to handle. So that is a little history of the InnerTrac. It measures, like I said, it measures changes in skin resistance, and that gives us clues as to what the person's thinking, and we'll get into that a little bit later. In order to use the InnerTrac, you have to think about the mind and about thought a little bit differently than the establishment concepts and the traditional concepts. Even New Age people tend to believe that a thought is something that occurs in the brain, and that it's an electrochemical reaction inside the brain. I discovered that this is not the case, but at any rate, as long as a person holds firmly onto that belief, it is really almost impossible to use the kind of GSR machine that shows changes in resistance through a voltmeter, because there's nothing to relate this to, because of that paradigm. Now, if a person isn't stuck with that paradigm about the brain and electrochemical resistance, like an 8-year-old, I can teach him to use those other machines. But a person who has that idea of what a thought is going to be very complicated, because they're going to be constantly measuring. They're constantly trying to apply this through that frame. It's like if you're trying to explain a psychological or philosophical concept, and the person has to translate everything that they hear through Sufism or through traditional Freudian psychology, and they're translating everything in their mind as you go along. They're not able to empty the cup, so to speak. But with the InnerTrac, you can tell a person, well, this light means that, this light means that. Here, you put it in their hands, and they talk, and they look, and they see, yes, for sure, I'm talking about something that's making me uptight, and boy, this is showing it's getting uptight. And you ask them something that brings some kind of relief, and you see this relief. They very seldom ask you, how does the machine know? Because they just don't ask that. It's like people don't ask when they get into a car and they see these attenuator lights that light up when you turn your ignition on. They tell you that your oil pressure is okay or not okay. People don't ask, well, how does it know? Because they don't even really know what oil pressure is. All they know, hopefully, is that if the light goes on, you can't drive the car anymore. You'll ruin it. You pull over and call a mechanic. Well, that's called they call them colloquially idiot lights. And in aircraft where they have a lot of them, they don't want to be so condescending, so they call them attenuator lights. Anyhow, this is kind of an attenuator light for the different things that occur when you're talking to a person in a session or not in a session. So, what do you need to know about thought? What's the different paradigm? Well, a thought is a quasi-physical. This is a hypothesis. I'm asking you to just listen to it and accept it for the moment. Otherwise, this is what works for the InnerTrac and for other GSR machines, really. A thought is a quasi-physical hologram or a flow. It's created and projected by the being who owns the body. It becomes a little bit metaphysical. It's an ancient concept, but it's very difficult to understand for somebody who knows that they are a body. In our culture, people are considered to be bodies, and life is a function of the body. And this is a stable datum for a lot of people, and if you shake that, they become very disoriented. In some parts of the world, that is not the case, but this is a cultural thing. And so if you understand that, you understand a lot more about how thoughts are generated, how they're transmitted. There's a lot to say about that, but we will get to that later or at a different time when we can go into this more thoroughly. Now, if thoughts can be projected by a person, in other words, say, most of you have some kind of a table or a desk in front of you. Okay, I want you to imagine a small animal on that desk or table. Where is that animal actually located? And if you think that it is in your brain, well, then you're conforming to accepted thought. If you think that the animal that you have conceived of is sitting on the table, is actually located on the table, this is actually correct. And there are people who can walk into the room and see that animal that you have projected onto the table. In fact, you can project that animal wherever you want. You could project it to another person. Well, I'll tell you how I found out about that. But there's an inference that thoughts, if that's the case, thoughts are not as private as we think they are. I'll tell you how I found out about it. I was sitting up late one night with a girlfriend, and we were bored, and I wanted to just trying to amuse ourselves. And I thought, let's play some telepathy games. Let's do an experiment. I went into a closet down the hallway, and I pulled out a deck of cards. And I looked at the top card, and initially I thought it was Ace of Hearts. And I got into the light in the hallway, and I said, I realized that it was actually Four of Hearts. So I called out to her in another room, what card am I looking at? And she said, Ace of Hearts. And I took a deep breath, and I said, guess again. And she said, Four of Hearts. in that moment, my entire perspective on the mind, and in some ways the soul, it changed. It changed. It was an enormous epiphany for me. And we spent the rest of the evening playing with this. It seemed that I could look at a card and project it to her. And later on, we did this with songs. I would just think of a song, and she could give me the title. I went into my workshop, and I did this with tools. She could tell me what tools they were, and even one that she didn't recognize, she had never seen before, she described it. And that was enormous for me. And I realized I've in 4.5 years of college, nobody ever showed me this in a psychology class. It didn't even come up as a controversial subject. Just nada, nothing. And what were the corollaries? What were the inferences? I mean, if we can do this with each other, anybody can do it. You see? And we do this all the time with each other. But it's not part of our culture. It's not okay to experience this. But you can take this, what I've told you about, just take a deck of cards, shuffle it, and call somebody you know in Paris on Skype. Ask them, what card am I looking at? A lot of people will not get it. The majority of people won't get it the first time. Say, if you do this at a party with 20 people, maybe 2 or 3 people will get it. Maybe 4 people will get it the first time and then never again because it shakes them up. 1 or 2 people will be able to get it repeatedly because they're open to it. This is phenomenal, and this is what I realized. They give rise to feelings, which are physiological. They have to do with the body. As we're saying before, this experiment that I was doing, that I invite you to do, there's no physiological explanation for it. Now, people talk about brain waves and electro this, and they come up with specious explanations, but those explanations do not allow them to get better at doing this. This is a skill, like playing a violin. You can actually practice it and get better. But if you're stuck on the idea that this is a physical connection that you have or an electronic connection, you won't get better at it. If you understand that you, as a being, have the ability to project thoughts and to see thoughts from other people, you can do a lot more than that, too. But if you realize that you can do that, you can get better at it. But what does it have to do with feelings? Well, feelings are predicated on thought, and feelings are physiological. Now, there's some other things that we need to know about thought that are, obvious, but it helps to state them because we forget about these things. Could you go to slide 7? An important part of any kind of therapy is the concept that it's possible to have a thought, to think something, and not know that you're thinking it. People don't often know what their thoughts are. Did you ever have a person close to you acting kind of angry or nasty, and you ask them, what's the matter? And they say, nothing. They're not lying. There's something there. We can find it. We can find it with the InnerTrac, but they don't know what it is. The whole concept of therapy that uses cognitive therapy. What is cognitive therapy? What's a therapy? Cognitive therapy is simply a procedure that we bring a thought to consciousness. It's like bringing a file from your computer, CPU, up onto the monitor. You can have things going on in your computer. They're going on, they're changing things, but you can't see what they are. Some of these are supposed to happen, like a subroutine that automatically saves something so that you don't lose it, or something that helps you to get online, or something that keeps you from getting online. But you don't see these things on their monitor unless you're a programmer and you have some special way of seeing it. But if you can't see it, on the other hand, you can't change it. So you can have a thought, all kinds of thoughts, memories, decisions, beliefs, upsets, all of these things, you could have them going on. You can kind of feel them, but you can't change them unless you can see them. That's the whole idea of cognitive therapy, isn't it? So now there are some other important insights that we need about thoughts. Again, some of you have known these for a long time. Some of you have recently learned them. Yeah, we know all about this. And some people are hearing this maybe for the first time. I'm not sure what all of your backgrounds are, but these are not completely new ideas, but they're helpful to know in using the InnerTrac. One is that thoughts are not normally stored. There are theories, specious theories, that we store thoughts in the cells of our bodies. Well, we don't have enough cells for all the thoughts we've got. You're not still thinking about what to have for breakfast. Well, what did you do with that thought? Well, you delete it. Most thoughts, we delete them as soon as we've used them. There are some kinds of thoughts that do get stored, and they are what I call negative mental energy thoughts, and we'll talk about those shortly, but they do get stored, and the energy that they contain is residual, and we can measure that. But, well, how do we remember if we don't store thoughts? Well, you don't need to know this for most therapy, but my theory is we actually move around in time and space as beings. We can go back to an area and pervade the area. You know, we're not sitting here thinking about what we had for supper last night. That would be dysfunctional. But we can go back in time and pervade that area and look at what we had for supper. We can use these abilities also when we're doing therapy, like PTSD therapy, regression therapies. We can send a person back, and in my belief, they're actually going back, not with their body, but as beings, we can do that. We can also move to another room or another state instantly. We have this ability. And this is how you have things like remote viewing. And these are the concepts that are used by people who learn and practice remote viewing. So this is a kind of a new paradigm about thought. And if you just accept it for just a little bit, I think you'll see that this is very workable, very usable. So I told you that there are certain kinds of thoughts that do get stored. And I call these negative mental energy thoughts, NME thoughts. Little acronym, enemy. The pun is intended. And these thoughts are stored. And there are only 4 kinds of them. There are many, many, many thoughts that get stored, but there are only 4 categories. And that would be slide 11. Okay. The first is upsets. An upset is some degree of being pissed off or aggravated. It could be just a slight turn off, or it could be absolute rage. These are degrees of the same thing. You know what it feels like when we get angry. Well, some other quick insights on this. When a person has an upset that's gone on for too long, they become sad. That's sadness. And I've been stuck this in the PowerPoint. There's so much material here, but I'm giving you this, and maybe some of it will stick. That's sadness. When a person has been sad for so long that they decide that nothing can be done with it, you just have to learn to live with it. Eventually, that starts to affect the endocrine system, and they get into a condition that we call depression. Now, these are very controversial statements, because depression and stress in general is big business. We'll talk about this later. But this has a lot to do with why these ideas are not quickly accepted in the establishment, and certainly by the pharmaceutical companies. I told you that one of the negative mental energies is upsets. Another one is quandaries. Okay, a quandary is a circumstance. We call it a problem, but really it's a special kind of problem. What it is when we have a goal or an intention and simultaneously have another goal or an intention, but the two goals preclude each other, and we don't make a choice. A guy wants to be self-employed, right? But he wants to go in business for himself. But he also wants security. And in his universe, he can't have both. Of course, I feel more secure being self-employed, but that's my universe. You know, if he grew up in a certain conventional family, you know, Irish parents are Irish immigrants, the idea of quitting a job that's paying you money, even for a better job, is the dumbest thing in the world. And to just quit a job and go and take a chance of being self-employed, inconceivable. So in his universe, he can't be self-employed and have his own business, but he really wants his own business. He's got a product, he's got ideas, he's got ambitions, but he's got this job, and it's a terrible quandary. And he can't go around thinking about it because that would make him dysfunctional. So what he does is he stuffs it into some part of his body, which typically doesn't like that sort of hologram, and that part of the body can get sick. Okay, so that's about quandaries. The third negative mental energy is guilt. Now, guilt is a feeling. Most people know the feeling of guilt. A lot of people don't really have an idea of what causes it. Even people I found talking to people at Whole Life Expos and stuff like that, people who teach about it and give workshops, they can't really define guilt. They don't know what it comes from. It's actually a feeling that comes from a circumstance where you have done something that you feel you shouldn't have done, and you're trying to keep it a secret. Or you haven't done something which you should have done, and you're trying to keep it a secret from the people around you, maybe even from yourself. That creates a kind of a file. In computers, we would say it creates a troublesome file, a corrupt file. It screws up the operating system. It also manifests in the person's behavior. Somebody who feels guilty like that, like I described, they tend to back off. They tend to be very back offish. And there's a second stage of guilt where you say something, or someone says something that makes them wonder if they have been found out. They don't know that they've been found out, but they're wondering. It's like when you ask your kid, what happened in school today? And the kid suddenly, for no apparent reason, says, why do you keep asking me stuff like this? Why are you so nosy? So it's suddenly critical. That comes from a situation where the person had a secret. Something happened in school. He got reprimanded. He beat somebody up. He cut class. He did something. And he's hoping it'll just go away, keep it a secret, and you start asking them. It's like when a woman says, what's this red mark on your collar? And well, it's the secretary's lipstick is what it is, and the guy starts to become very nasty, very critical. So those are aspects of guilt. This is the third of the four negative mental energies. It screws up the operating system, so to speak. And the fourth one, and that's slide 14. The fourth one is fear. And now fear, again, is a feeling. And what it's caused by is a picture, a mental picture. You can call it a memory, but it's a mental picture of something that happened in the past, which is very painful or was traumatic in some way. It could have been an embarrassment. It could have been a loss or something like that. And it must never happen again. And so fear is almost, you might think of it as a mechanism to protect the person by keeping something from happening that hurt them in the past. But you walk around with fear and it screws up the adrenal glands, and you end up with all kinds of cortisol and stuff. Physiologically, it's not good for you. If you're trying to escape a tiger or a grizzly bear, it might help you to run faster than the bear for a few moments. But if you go through your whole day like that, it will wreck your body. And in our culture, it's very common to have people afraid of being caught, afraid of being found out, afraid of losing their jobs, afraid of running out of money, afraid of what's happening with their health, afraid of what's happening with their relationships. So they're constantly in fear about something. And if you ask them about it, they often will say, I'm not afraid of anything. And they're not lying. They just can't get it up on the monitor where they can do something about it. You see how that works. So we're going to talk for a moment about stress. That's slide 15. So thoughts are sources of mental stress. And of course, there's stress that comes from not having eaten, or from being in pain from hitting your head with your hand with a hammer, or something like food poisoning. Those are certainly stress, but they're not mental stress. And when a doctor says, "Well, your symptoms seem to be caused by stress," he's right, but unfortunately, he doesn't know enough about what he's talking about to tell you what to do about it. Because if you ask what the definition of stress is, well, I did an essay where I collected from the internet, from Google, all of the statements about what stress is. And none of them, these are accepted definitions of stress, and none of them really define it in a way that you can do something about it. If you consider that stress is the presence of one or more of the four negative mental energies, it gives you a way to do something about it, because each of those negative mental energies has a procedure or process that will allow you, or a therapist, or it allows the thing to be rectified. And I'm not going to talk about those processes. Those are in my book, Clearing a Guide for Professionals. And we'll explain a little bit about that book a little later on. But you see that those thoughts are the sources of mental stress. Now, this is hard to get accepted or hard to discuss. It's actually dangerous to discuss in some environments, because stress is big business. And legally, in many places, stress can only be handled by drugs. Big pharma has an enormous investment. They get enormous amounts of money from the medicines that they have for stress, from researching how well these medicines work, and they're not interested in redefining stress, or really even in defining stress. According to establishment medicine, stress is a lack of pharmaceuticals in your bloodstream. So we don't say that by the sessions using the techniques I use, including the InnerTrac or anything else you're doing, we don't say this will heal your stress. What I will say is these will address the issues that are creating stress. That's convoluted enough so you're protected legally. But, I mean, some places, I think it was Pennsylvania, you can't even tell a person to visualize something without being a psychologist, which is, it's like the guild system in the Middle Ages, where you dare not paint a picture unless you were in the Picture Painters Guild. So anyhow, I think we can start talking about how does the InnerTrac actually work. Well, it shows stress. It shows the presence of one or more of the the negative mental energy thoughts, because they affect the body when you invoke them, when you invoke a thought that is in that category. It actually does something different to the circuitry of the body, to the electronics of the body. It's actually very simple. It causes the skin resistance to go up. That's very simple. When did we find that out? Over 100 years ago. The first person to recognize that thoughts change the skin resistance of the body was probably the person who invented the Wheatstone bridge, Sir Charles Wheatstone, who also invented the concertina, by the way. He invented a circuit that you could find the resistance of an unknown object. And the first person that he tried it on, of course, is himself, on the human body, which, you know, it's funny. It's like you hand a chimpanzee a mirror, and the first thing he looks at is himself, right? He becomes fascinated with this. And then what he realized was that it's always changing. It doesn't have a specific resistance. Well, what changes it? Well, different emotions, different thoughts change it. And a guy named Tarkanoff experimented with that, and he found out also that the changes in skin resistance were not caused by perspiration. And he did some experiments, and that information is available, but it was forgotten more recently by people who teach in psychology departments about skin resistance and GSR, and they now say that it is from perspiration. Well, it works in both directions, and you can't unperspire that fast. So they're lacking some basic information here. And of course, the conclusion is that it has a peculiar relationship to thought. Skin resistance has a peculiar relationship to thought, but we don't know what it is, and so it's not useful in therapy, which is not true. And Carl Jung recognized that this was very important and had great potentials, but he was using equipment that was very, very slow to respond. It was kind of like hooking yourself up to a multi-tester from Radio Shack. And then you can actually, if you can hold a particular thought long enough, you can actually see the resistance changing. But it's actually changing much faster than that. If you have the right equipment, you can see that it changes from word to word, from moment to moment. It's extremely fast. And it's not that subtle. It's, quite a few ohms, quite a few measures of resistance, and it can happen extremely. What we're interested in is the stored thoughts, because the stored enemy thoughts, as opposed to the ones that you're generating moment to moment as you think, they have a residual energy. They have a residual energy. It stays with you all the time. And so when you trigger that thought, by mentioning the subject, for instance, you see an extremely fast response. You'll see a response on the InnerTrac before the person really has a chance to think about it. And this is very useful. We'll demonstrate that in just a moment. In fact, what we're going to do right now is I'm going to change the setup here, so we have room for another person, and I'm going to bring in Norma Novi, my wife, but we're kind of going. I'm going to invite Rhonda to go to blackness for a moment, pull the curtain, and we will change our setup. Is that okay, Rhonda? Here, you cannot see it. It's not lit. It's a white light. And interestingly, that white light actually shows up when a person has transcended a subject while you're talking about it. So when that light goes on, it's important to ask the person what happened, because it's quite possible to go too far if you don't know where. If you need to be finished with your process and not realize it. And this will help you. This will alert you. There's another light here that goes on when the person is very angry, and that's useful because in the therapy modalities that I've been taught, if a person's angry, there's no point in doing anything except to deal with what's causing them to be angry. And because it'll stop anything else from happening. Okay, here's a little demonstration. Are you ready, Norma?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, now these lights will move randomly as Norma is thinking and anticipating what I'm going to say, but we're only interested in the lights that show a reaction to what I'm saying, because when I ask a question, I'm invoking a thought. If it's there, there may not be a thought, in which case it won't react. You see how that works? Okay, so Norma, in the last week, is there anything that's upset you? Okay, that's it. Time out. I'm going to make a comment. There was a response. What was the time between me asking the question and the response?
Less than a second, just immediately.
Exactly. Remember that. Let me give you another demonstration. Here's another question. Okay, what did you have for supper last night?
Lamb.
Oh,
Zucchini.
Thank you. So there was no reaction there at all, right?
Right.
Okay, here's another demonstration. What kind of car do you drive?
Toyota.
Okay. Now, you see you got a reaction to that, a very slight reaction, maybe about 2 seconds after, in fact, after she even answered. The first one was instantaneous. That's very useful, because that shows that there's an issue there. Now, I ask that question in a very general way because, for demonstration purposes, you could ask a specific thing, like, do you have an upset at work? Or do you have an upset with your boss? Or do you have an upset about your body or something? And the person may not have an upset about that, and you don't want to go fixing something that's not broken. So if you get either no response or a response that happens 2 seconds later, that's not something that you want to work on in the session. Even if you had a hunch that might be a good idea to work on, you see, because either it's a wrong hunch or the person is not ready for it. This makes it very, very useful in a session. So here's another example of how we use it. There's something that I call the icebreaker. In my book, it's a process. It's called Empowering Conversation. It's a list of questions. I'm not even going to tell you what those questions are. I mean, when we do a workshop, I can write those down on the board and have you practice, working with them. But I'm just going to do this and see if you can figure out the questions and the responses. And the goal is to get Norma to talk about something that is, in fact, an issue for her, and hopefully to resolve something about it. Okay, and we've given this, I think, 6 minutes. Okay, does that sound too ambitious?
Nah.
Okay.
Nah.
So, what's an issue for you lately?
Well, I had an issue last night, or the night before last.
Oh.
Yeah, that was a big issue.
Uh-huh. Okay. Was that the hospital thing?
Yeah, the hospital thing.
Okay. Well, now, time out for a second. If Norma was paying for a session, I would probably not dive into that because we did not get a reaction when she talked about it. We went to the hospital and there was a scare and she was emotional. It turned out to be, not a big problem. And my guess is, I would never say this to a client, but at the risk of offending Norma, there is not still a lot of charge on it, or you've already dealt with most of the upset of the charge. Would that be accurate?
Maybe.
Maybe. Okay. So let me ask you that again. Okay, about your trip to the hospital. Is there something that you're suppressing? I don't see anything there.
Okay. All right.
Okay. I'd like to acknowledge that it was a scary experience.
Yeah.
And you got to miss your meeting that you wanted to go to.
Yeah.
Yeah. You see, there's a little charge on that.
Yeah, that meeting I wanted to go. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, there's got to be something else that has bugged you in the last few days.
Sleeping.
Okay, tell me about
Not
sleeping. Well, sleeping, we got an instant response on that.
Yeah,
Okay, so there's an issue about sleeping? Yeah.
There's an issue about sleeping as it regards our cat.
Oh, as it regards the cat. Okay. I don't see anything on the cat specifically, but what about the issue of sleeping? Well, tell me about it.
Yeah, there's a lot going on at night in the house. Cats, bathrooms, all sorts of stuff, and it's just hard to get a good night's sleep.
And is this a repeated thing? Is it a continuous thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I say just turn up the.
I turned up the sensitivity, so we get a little bit more reaction. Okay.
Yeah.
Or a little bit more response. Okay. So, what thoughts have you had about not enough sleep?
Well, locking the cat outside at night. That's a thought.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you do that last night?
No.
Okay. What else have you done about not enough sleep? How have you tried to handle it?
Meditate.
Okay. Anything else?
Go to bed earlier. Film them.
Okay. Other stuff? What haven't you told someone about not enough sleep?
Well, I haven't told you how much letting the cat in at night bugs me. Yeah.
And thank you for telling me that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
The cat comes in and pummels me with her little kneading stuff, in the middle of the night. It's the most biggest cat I've ever had.
Feline acupuncture.
That's it, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you. Anything else about that you wanted to say that you haven't said?
I don't think so.
Okay. So suppose we exclude the cat.
Okay.
Anything else about that we need to look at?
No, I don't think of anything right now.
Okay. What I'm pushing for is for this guy to light up, you see. So in a paid session, I'd probably go back and see if there's, I try to be more thorough. But I mean, how do you feel about this, about the sleep?
I think the sleep is an ongoing process to solve. So I don't think it's like, I'm not going to have an enlightenment moment right now. I don't know. I'm sorry. I wanted you to have that white light go on.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the demonstration.
Yeah, thank you.
We pick up each other's thoughts. We can pick up the Queen of Hearts, but we can also pick up a headache. We can also pick up a fear. We can also pick up a crazy consideration. It's not ours, but we misown the source of it. We think it's ours because it occurred to us. An example would be a girl grows up with parents that are very bigoted. They hate black people. But she doesn't have this issue. So she falls in love with a guy in high school, and he's black. And her parents go ballistic about it, and she defies her parents. Maybe in one case, I know if she had to move out. Okay, so her parents are over here, she's here, she's got a relationship with this guy, but there's a part of her that thinks like her parents, maybe her father. We build our operating system, not just people, animals. It has a lot to do with how we grew up with our parents give us the beginning of our operating system, and we go through life fixing it because they're crazy. And, it's not always appropriate. So we fix it as well as we can. But there's still a part of her that sees herself and her relationship from her father's point of view. And she starts becoming occasionally very unreasonable with this guy. And the poor guy has no idea what's causing it. She has no idea what's causing it. Things come out of her mouth, she doesn't know where the hell they're coming from. Okay? This is normal human behavior, normal in quotation marks. So if she could find out where this stuff was coming from and whose viewpoint she was operating from in those moments, this would be extremely therapeutic. You see, the problem with beliefs is, if they're not appropriate, is that we don't know we have them. We don't know we're manifesting them. We don't necessarily have to replace them with a new belief. Now, there are people here, I'm sure, that have been taught modalities where you find a belief that's inappropriate and you replace it with another belief. So belief is kind of programming. And in my humble opinion, the best programming is no programming. The best programming is be in present time and behave, respond appropriately. Now, I don't expect everybody to flat out agree with me with that, but this helps to explain what you do when you have found an issue. You have found a thought that has a trigger. You found a trigger. You can tap on it. You can use EFT. You can use a number of other things. You can use meditation. You can use a mantra. You can use affirmations. Going naturally into my own concepts, my own modality, which you may or may not want to share or explore or look at. And what I'm trying to do is get the person into present time. And once they're in present time and they can see what's happening, okay, you get the idea. I think who's in good shape, runs a business, veteran, and you can ask him a question. When you were in Vietnam, did you ever get shot? And most people, you have just put them like a hypnotic spell into that experience. To some degree, you have moved them out of present time into that experience. It's very unusual to have a person say, yes, I was shot, It's a terrible experience. But I think, I've dealt with it. I can tell you about it sometimes if you want. You won't get that kind of reaction from most veterans. Unless they've done a lot of Buddhist meditation or they've actually run it out in some kind of a regression session. And they've taken off that negative energy. You mention that and they get sucked right back into it. In fact, you can tell them, okay, close your eyes. Look around. Tell me what you see. Oh, Jesus, oh boy, we're sitting there in the trench behind this burned out, truck, and this 12-year-old kid, throws a grenade at us. Somebody shoots him, and then there's somebody else from the side hit me, and it's stuff that he's talking to you about stuff he never looked at. He's remembering details in the session about something that happened 15 years ago, and he never even told anybody about it. So how do you make a thought gone? I'll tell you a secret. It should be part of our culture because it's very, very therapeutic to know that. The way you uncreate a thought is to go through the same motion that you did when you created it. It's a toggle effect. It's like one of these old lights when you want to turn it on, you pull a chain. How do you turn it off?
Pull the chain.
You pull the chain.
Pull the chain.
So you go through the motion of creating a thought, and to get rid of a thought, you go through the motion of creating it again, and the thought goes poof. This is how you get rid of the thought about what you had for supper last night, and anything else. I told you about mocking up or creating a picture of a small animal on your desk. Okay, when you're done with that, hopefully you don't still have an animal crawling around on your desk. Okay, it just goes poof when you're done with it. So whatever the actual mechanism, I mean, this is kind of analogous with that I'm telling you about the light. But whatever the mechanism, you normally have control over it. When something is too painful to look at, too uncomfortable to consider, you don't do a good job of deleting it. And part of it or all of it sticks. Okay? And the part of it that sticks, that bothers us, is the negative energy. It's interesting, when a person has a terrible car crash and you ask them to recount what happened, you might do this in therapy during a situation where maybe traumatic incident reduction. You ask them to recount the car crash, and they're fuzzy about it, and they tell you what happened, and you say, okay, go back to the beginning of that same incident and go through it again, tell me what happens. And they go through it, and now it's different. It's now they see somebody else hit them. You go through it again, and now they see that they were not even the driver. They thought they were the driver. You see, it becomes clearer and clearer as the negative energy burns off of it. They actually have more access to the incident itself. So when you have a traumatic memory, there are two parts to it. There's the graphic part, and then there is the energetic part of it. Who here uses kinesiology? There are people that are very good with it. I've seen people that were just remarkable with it. I've used it in lieu of anything else. It's certainly better than nothing. I also know that one guy who uses it a lot, he cheats. He pushes harder on the things that, when he's doing muscle testing, the things that he thinks that it is, and he pushes less when he thinks that it should be a particular result. And the nice thing about the InnerTrac is that it's more objective. I'm not going to say it's 100% objective, but it's a lot more objective than the muscle testing. And I call it electronic kinesiology. And it is more objective, and it instills more confidence, I find, in clients when you ascertain something. In fact, you ask them a question and about a subject that you think might be a hot subject, and you just turn this toward them and you ask them a question. If it doesn't react, and you saw me do this with Norma, it doesn't react, I'm not going to go there. Now, I'm not saying there's nothing deep down there, but it's not accessible. It's not going to give me a win as a therapist to go and dig around at that. I mean, everybody has had probably at some point in their life issues with homosexuality or thoughts about it or uncomfortable. They've dealt with it. You ask a person, do you have an issue with homosexuality? Not everybody's going to read. Now, why would you, as a therapist, go and tell them, well, we need to look at your homosexuality issues? How you get you dig yourself into an avalanche there. If it's not broken, you don't fix it. And you also, I have found, not to want something for somebody that they don't want for themselves. You can see externally that a person has an issue with something. A person with one leg says that she wants to come and be a ballerina. And can you help her with that? Well, this is going to be very difficult at a certain point. Now, if you ask her about, what about your one leg? And she says, what one leg? It would be best to get off the subject and find something that she's up to confronting. Because if you just rub her nose in that and try to force her to confront reality, I call that the Dr. Phil method of therapy, you're wanting something for someone they don't want to. It's the formula for failure. and a waste of time and money for the person, and certainly time for you and credibility. So if it reads, it means it's accessible. It means, first of all, that it's there. Second, that it's accessible. Sometimes you know very well it's there, but it's not accessible. Best to work on something else. I can give an example. A lady came to me a number of years ago, and she wanted help with studying, with taking tests, creative writing. And it came out that she was living off of her boyfriend's credit card behind his back, and he didn't know it. Well, this is an enormous integrity issue. But that's not what she wanted to handle. She wanted to handle the creative writing issue. So we handled the creative writing issue in 1 or 2 sessions. Third session, she came in, walked in tears, saying, "I've got to do something about this thing with my boyfriend." So she was finally ready to look at it, you see, and we addressed it when she was up to looking at it. You also have the SUD scale, subjective units of discomfort or dysfunction, whatever. I've seen different translations of that. Again, you ask the person after you've done a therapy session. Of course, before the therapy session, it's like 10. After the therapy session, it's down to 2. Well, what else is left? I don't know. You ask them for a thought, they don't have access to it. You put them on the InnerTrac and you ask them what else is left, and it'll read, which means you're not done. And you find out what read, which you can do by calling out different things or having the person guess. Just call out a bunch of guesses. Doesn't cost anything, and one of them will light up. That's the thing that you've got to address. You see, and so it's more accurate than the SUD scale. It's more objective, and the other thing is that it keeps you from trying to fix it after it's been fixed, which we'll talk about that in a moment. It's a subject called overrun. There are some other uses of the InnerTrac. The hardest thing that people who do EFT have to do is figure out exactly the right thing to run. Gary Craig, he actually got it spread out there. Gary Craig inspired a lot of people, and he has said that when it doesn't work, when EFT doesn't work, it's because you're not tapping on the right thing. Well, how do you know what is the right thing? Well, one approach in EFT is a shotgun approach, where a person says, "Well, I have stage fright." Okay, well, you're going to tap on the stage fright and hold the stage fright. Now I want you to tap on being embarrassed when you stood up in front of a bunch of people, and let's see, you're going to tap on that time that you were punished for talking, talking out of turn in class, and we're going to tap on your upset stomach because you have an upset stomach. And they tap on all those peripheral things, hoping to get the right one, the actual key. And sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. And for the rest of us, I find it boring to go through all of these things. The shotgun approach. It's nicer if you can pinpoint what it is and tap on that. Now, how does Gary Craig do it? I've watched him do sessions. He talks to the people a lot. He's very interested in what's going on with him. And by the time he actually starts tapping, he has a pretty clear idea of what he's trying to accomplish and what he's up against. And that helps him. But if you're using the InnerTrac, you can actually pinpoint the item and tap on that. This is a huge advantage. The other thing that you can do with the InnerTrac is you can verify that it's working. Because if your procedure is working, I'm talking about EFT, the tapping, or EMDR, you know what that is, the rapid eye movement. Okay. If they're hooked up to this, as you're doing your procedure, I mean, even regressions, even talk therapy, Dianetics, anything that you're doing, if it's working, you see a discharge as it's happening. If you no longer see a discharge, and you see that increase, it's not working. Now, it Could be several reasons. It could be that you already finished and went past it. We'll talk about that in a minute. Or it could be because you're running the wrong thing. It can also be because it's not his issue. It may be somebody else's issue that he has adopted. You see? He gets real nervous around Chinese people. Well, what considerations do you have about Chinese people? None. I have no considerations whatsoever. I have an uncle that I really liked who hated Chinese people. Boing, and you'll see this huge drop, this big discharge. So he's misowned his uncle's viewpoint, and somehow that's crept in there and it's screwing him up. Okay, and you can fix that. Is the point. So it's important to be able to verify that things are discharging if you're working on them, and if they're not discharging, stop. You're doing the wrong thing. You're running the wrong item, or you've gone past something, or the guy has become angry. Or another thing that can happen is you place them suddenly in a situation where you start to approach a big secret that he hopes you never find out about, and you have to turn around and deal with that. There's a way to deal with that, but not by continuing what you were doing before. Okay? So the other thing is knowing when you're done. Yeah, very important, because once it's clean, you're finished. And if you keep trying to clean it, you get into the situation where the person becomes depressed, they lose interest, they actually feel invalidated. They felt good before, and now you keep going, and they start to feel worse and worse and worse. And this is very common. I did a demonstration at the ASEP conference a few years ago in San Diego, American Association of Energy Psychology, big conference. And I was running a breakaway session, and I had a guy who was a noted EFT practitioner come up and work on a woman. And she was hooked up to the InnerTrac. And he worked with her for about 2 minutes, a minute or two, very short amount of time. And I saw this big release of energy, and that white light came on. And I asked her, did something change? She said, oh, yes. Yeah, I feel much better. And he said, but I'm not done. I've got more stuff I need to do. Well, anything he was doing after that would have been an overrun. It would have been too much, and in fact, reversing his win. He'd be taking her win away and discouraging himself because it wouldn't have worked out well. It's very nice if you can see when you're done. If it's not broken, don't fix it. That's a very important concept. Thank you for having me here and for including me in your community.